Hello, this is part 5 in a series of videos on terminology and notation in vibrational astrology, and in this video we are going to learn about supersymmetry patterns. We will also learn terms like string and pyramid, and we will learn about variations of these patterns based on how many planets are involved with them. And these configurations are midpoint configurations. Okay, let's dive into this. These are powerful midpoint configurations. Let's see how this works. We learned what a midpoint structure is in previous videos in this series, and you probably know about it from other videos or other knowledge in astrology. So for example, on the right side of this slide is a part of my 17 vibration chart. And in my 17 vibration chart, I have Jupiter conjunct the Uranus-Pluto midpoint with a 13-minute orb. This is the kind of thing you'll see in almost any chart, a midpoint structure. In itself, it's not that dramatic, unless it's in the natal chart or the eighth vibration chart. But if it's in a vibration like 17, it's just one midpoint structure. It's important, but it's not extremely powerful. And what's happening here with a midpoint structure is that, of course, the distance from Uranus to Jupiter for this particular midpoint and the distance from Pluto to Jupiter is about the same. That's what a midpoint structure is by definition. And in this case, it happens to be about 33 degrees. Let's see, from Uranus to Jupiter is a little more than 33 degrees. And from Jupiter to Pluto is also a little bit more than 33 degrees. The angle from Jupiter to Pluto looks like, well, it is a little bit bigger than the distance from Uranus to Jupiter, and that's why there's an orb of 13 minutes. Okay, now, the powerful midpoint configurations, and these are extremely powerful. They are among the most important things in an astrology chart. They define the main motivations, the behavior of the person. These are the big things. And one of them is this. What if a fourth planet is about 33 degrees after Pluto? So 33 degrees after Pluto would be about 3 degrees, about 3.5 degrees. We said this is a little more than 33 degrees. So about 3.5 to 4 degrees of Virgo would be 33 to 33.5 degrees past Pluto. Or what would happen if we go 33 degrees before Uranus? Same idea. In other words, we have a string of 4 planets that are about equally spread from each other. And what's going to happen in this case, and here's what happens in my 17 vibration chart, is I have exactly that happening. Saturn is about 33 degrees before Uranus. It doesn't really matter whether it would be a planet 33 degrees before Uranus or 33 degrees after Pluto. You're going to have 4 planets that are about equally spread from each other. It's like beads on a chain, right? They're equally spread. Very simple idea, and wow, is this powerful. Of course, if you think about it, you're going to end up with 2 midpoint structures. As we saw in the previous slide, we have Jupiter at the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, and now we're also going to have Uranus at the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, of course, because they're about equally spread. Now, in this case, the Uranus conjunct Jupiter-Saturn midpoint is 1 degree 15 minutes. That is weak. It's, the maximum orb is 1.5 degrees, degree and 15 minutes. It's weak, it's there, but it's not very strong. The Jupiter-Uranus-Pluto, very strong. But even though this Uranus-Jupiter-Saturn is weak, it is there, and there is this configuration of 4 planets equally spread from each other, approximately equally spread from each other, and making the 2 midpoint structures. What determines if the planets are close enough to being equally spread is if the midpoint structures are there. If these midpoint structures are there, then we consider it to be this configuration of 4 planets that are equally spread from each other, and we call it a string. I already used that term. You probably guessed already. This is a string. So let's see if I've got other notes here on this slide that I want to mention. Let me read this last paragraph. This is a powerful planetary configuration. 4 planets make 2 midpoint structures. And that is one of the ways in which this configuration has this awesome quality to it. You're adding one more planet to the midpoint structure. So we had the Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto midpoint structure. We add one more planet, Saturn, and we get another midpoint structure. And we're getting all of this symmetry because a midpoint structure is a form of symmetry. Jupiter is on the line of symmetry between Uranus and Pluto. Uranus is on the line of symmetry between Jupiter and Saturn. So these, you can think of this as like 2 planets on 2 different lines of symmetry is one way to think about why a string is so powerful, has such a big impact on us. Okay. So let's see, what am I saying here? You can think of, yes, I already said this. Okay, this is what I already said. Let's go on to the next slide. Now, there's a second way to obtain another midpoint structure by adding a 4th planet. So instead of adding Saturn before Uranus or adding some planet after Pluto, about 33.5 degrees, is there another way? Just remove in your mind, make believe Saturn's not here. Let's go back to the Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto midpoint structure. Jupiter conjunct Uranus, Pluto midpoint. Is there another way to stick a planet, let's say it was Saturn, into this configuration of 3 planets to get a 4th midpoint structure? So hint, look at the first 3 planets in the string, or look at any 3 planets. So suppose you look at Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter. Now look at where Venus is. Okay. Look at Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter. If you haven't figured it out already, this should probably, you figured it out. What is Venus doing? On the next slide, we answer the question, and you've probably got the answer correct. What's happening is that Venus is at the midpoint of Saturn and Uranus. So you can, and what I've done here is I've put in pink, I've colored in this area to leave Pluto out of the picture so we can focus on just these 4 planets. Forget Pluto for a moment and just think about these 4 planets in the pink area. What's happening? Uranus is conjunct the Jupiter-Saturn midpoint, and then you take one side of the midpoint structure and you put a planet halfway in between those, and that's exactly what I have in my 17 vibration chart. Excuse me. So the other way, the second way that you get 4 planets making 2 midpoint structures is you put a planet halfway in between one side of the midpoint structure. You're taking one side of this midpoint structure, Uranus, Jupiter, Saturn, and you're putting a planet in between it. So Venus is conjunct the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, 1 degree 24 minutes. That's very weak, very weak. But it's there. The fact that it's weak doesn't mean it's not there. It is there. It's just weak. So this is a pyramid. So the configuration of Saturn, Venus, Uranus, and Jupiter making 2 midpoint structures is called a pyramid. You now know what a string is. You now know what a pyramid is. And those are the 2 ways that 4 planets can make 2 midpoint structures. Now, in a moment, we're going to learn about some variations of the pyramid. There are some variations of it, which we'll learn about. Okay, so by the way, another way we can say this is that Venus bisects this half of the midpoint structure. You'll hear people use that term. So if you hear it, you bisect. Sometimes people use that term when they talk about midpoint structures, because that's what a midpoint structure is. To put a planet in between two other planets is to bisect that angular distance. I just want to mention that because you may hear other astrologers emphasize that term. It's just another way to say you're putting a planet halfway in between two other planets. Okay, so that's a pyramid. Okay, now, excuse me, this is an important point. When you look at these two midpoint structures, Venus conjunct Saturn, Uranus midpoint, Uranus conjunct Jupiter, Saturn midpoint, there's two things that are important. One is that they are in different midpoint trees. So there's a different planet at the focus. Second thing is that there are two planets in common. So the two planets that are in common in these two midpoint structures are Saturn and Uranus. Okay, now that in itself doesn't sound earth-shaking. Why am I making such a big deal about it? The reason I'm making such a big deal about it is because that is how you will find pyramids and strings in a birth chart. How are you going to find them? Here's how you find them. You look at a midpoint structure, Venus conjunct Saturn, Uranus midpoint. Then you look at other midpoint structures, other midpoint trees, more specifically. Look at other midpoint trees and see if another midpoint tree has in common two planets. So only one planet has changed. So here we have Saturn and Uranus in both midpoints, and in both midpoint structures. So that's the rule. And what's going to happen, by the way, is that in one case, one of them will be the focal planet, in the other case it won't be. But anyway, just look for two planets that are the same. And then what do you have? If you see two midpoint trees, and those two midpoint trees have two planets in common, what do you have? You have either a string or a pyramid. That's the only two possibilities. And that's the key. I mean, that's the very, very important thing. That's how we find these things. Excuse me. Now, in my case, in addition to this pyramid made of 4 planets, of course, I also have the string. So this is a 5-planet configuration. So here's the full 5-planet configuration. These 5 planets are tied together in a very tightly integrated system. What this means is that those 5 planets are acting as a strong planetary configuration, very similar to the way you would think of like a grand cross or a kite configuration or some aspect configuration. This is extremely similar. It's the analogous thing to an aspect configuration is a midpoint configuration. So here are 5 planets tied together. This becomes a powerful system. Now, 2 of the midpoint structures are weak and 1 is strong. I'll talk about exactly how you interpret this later. So, given the fact that 2 of them are weak, it's not going to be that powerful. What's going to happen is it's going to have a pervasive effect because there are 5 planets involved in midpoints. It's there, but it does not become a dominant theme. So it's a personality characteristic that's there. It's solid, but it does not become a main focus of my life. If the orbs are small, then it becomes a main focus, or should be a main focus. It's something that I can make one of my primary activities, one of my primary ways of engaging with the world would be this. Given that the orbs are weak, it means that it's a pervasive kind of quality, a personality trait, and it can assist other things I do, but not become the primary focus of what I do. So it's a quality that can help what you're doing, but not be the main focus. That's what a large configuration does that has, in this case, mostly weak, that are mostly weak, mostly have large orbs. Okay, but it should work into many, many areas of my life, but as an assistant. You can think of these large configurations with mostly weak orbs as being assistants, helpers to the main theme. Okay, and that'll become clear. I'll talk about how we interpret this later. I mean, it's the specific interpretation for me, so it becomes more concrete. Okay, now what's happening is the string and the pyramid combine together. The first 4 planets are the pyramid, and then the Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto, everything but Venus is a string. So the 4-planet string and the 4-planet pyramid are all combining together into one configuration. Important point, how many planets are there? 5. How many midpoint structures are there? 3. So this is a 5-planet and 3 midpoint configuration. When you want to describe this configuration, it helps to give both the number of planets and the number of midpoints. That gives us a complete picture. Sometimes you can just specify the number of planets, but if you specify the number of midpoints as well, then we're very specific. It's a 5-planet, 3 midpoint configuration. And the way you're going to find this, again, is what I said before. You look at a midpoint structure, Jupiter conjunct Uranus, Pluto. Is there another midpoint structure that has 2 of these planets in common? Yes, Jupiter and Uranus. Now, I have 4 planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto. Is there another planetary configuration that has 2 of those? And we see Saturn and Uranus, and we have it. I'm going to go over that again later. So the basic, but just to give you a preview of it, of how you find these configurations, you look to see if 2 of the planets in the previous configurations, in the previous midpoint structures, let me say that again. You see if 2 of the planets in the midpoint structures that are already part of the configuration are in another midpoint structure. I'll make that clearer in a minute. Okay, and what's going to make it clearer, number 1, is to have a term. What are we going to call this planetary configuration? We know that Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, and Pluto, those equally spread planets, Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto, we have a nice straightforward name for it. It's a string. It's a 4-planet string, because you can imagine I could have a 5th planet or a 6th planet all equally spread. That would be unusual, but it's possible. So this is a string of 4 planets. I also have a pyramid. A pyramid is 4 planets also. All of this together, we have a name for it, and we call it a supersymmetry pattern. So, to read the second paragraph, when 5 or more planets are in the planetary configuration, which is the case here, 5 planets combined together, we call it a supersymmetry pattern. Typically, we call it a supersymmetry pattern. I'll explain later where you can have another term for it, but for now, be aware that if you have 5 planets combining together to make 3 midpoint structures, it's called a supersymmetry pattern. And more specifically, it's a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern, or you can call it a 5-planet, 3 midpoint supersymmetry pattern. Now, what about the 4-planet patterns we already discussed? The string of Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto, and the pyramid of Saturn, Venus, Uranus, and Jupiter. These 2 configurations of the string and the pyramid combine together to make the supersymmetry pattern. The 4-planet string and the 4-planet pyramid can also be called supersymmetry patterns. So you can call those 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. So here's the terminology. You ready for this, my friends? You've got the terminology. The terminology is this. Whenever you get a fourth planet making an additional midpoint structure, that's going to happen with either a string or a pyramid. Whenever you go beyond a simple midpoint structure, midpoint structure is a simple idea. It's 3 planets, 1 planet in the middle. Once you go beyond that, when I mean go beyond that, I mean you've added more planets. You add one more planet, you get a midpoint structure. Add another planet, you get another midpoint structure. Once you add even one more planet, we call it supersymmetry. It's a supersymmetry pattern. So a string, 4-planet string, a pyramid, which consists of 4 planets, those are also supersymmetry patterns. And you can be more specific and you could call it a 4-planet string if you want to. Or you can call it a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. But once you get to 5 planets, the tendency is just to call them supersymmetry. Because there's so many different ways it can happen that we tend to just call them supersymmetry patterns. So, supersymmetry patterns. There are 2 kinds. There are strings and pyramids. There are 2 things that are the components, we could say, of supersymmetry patterns. So there are strings and pyramids, and they combine together in various ways to make supersymmetry patterns. So a midpoint structure has 3 planets, and we sometimes say A equals B/C. Equals means conjunction or opposition, / means midpoint. So a midpoint structure is A equals B/C. Or, as we would normally say, A equals the BC midpoint. And sometimes in our language, if we're talking, we'll say A is at the BC midpoint. A supersymmetry pattern has at least 4 planets, right? Just to summarize what I said on with the previous slide, a supersymmetry pattern has at least 4 planets and makes at least 2 midpoint structures. That's the minimum requirement for a supersymmetry pattern. And again, the idea is very simple. You just add a 4th planet, you get another midpoint structure, and I showed you how to find that by looking at the midpoint trees. This is all very, very simple. It is convenient and simple to refer to all of these configurations as supersymmetry configurations, and to mention that a planetary configuration is a string if you happen to notice that it is a string and you wish to specify that it is a string. So in other words, many vibrational astrologers are just going to call all of these things supersymmetry patterns. You don't have to get bogged down, so to speak. I mean, you don't have to get stressed out memorizing a lot of vocabulary. We want vibrational astrology to be fun because it is fun, it's exciting, and you don't have to labor over, what do I call this thing? What do I call this thing? What do you call it? Let's go back. Let's go all the way back. What do you call that? Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto. It's a midpoint structure. Simple. Easy peasy, as we say. And what is this? You can just call it a supersymmetry pattern. And you can call it, more specifically, a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. So you could say that David has a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern in his 17 vibration chart. Let me say that again. David has a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern in his 17 vibration chart. That's a good way to describe it. If you want to be more specific, you could say David has a pyramid in his 17 vibration chart. Pyramid implies that it's 4 planets. When we say pyramid, a pyramid is 4 planets. So you could just call it a pyramid. You don't have to say it's a 4-planet pyramid, because a pyramid by definition has 4 planets. But a string can have more, because you can just string as many planets as you want, equally spaced until you've gone around the circle. So a string is, a lot of times we're more specific. You know, if you say he has a string in, if you said David has a string in his 17 vibration chart, typically that means 4 planets, because getting more than 4 planets is unusual. So, but it's good to be specific. Bottom line is this: people are going to say things in slightly different ways. So I want you to be able to translate. If someone says David has a string in his 17 vibration chart, what does it mean? Realistically, practically speaking, it's almost certainly a 4-planet string, because that's the most common and the one that shows up. And if there's more than 4, you'd want to be very, very clear about it. But if you want to communicate completely unambiguously and make it clear so there's no doubt, then say how many planets there are. Call it a 4-planet string. Pyramids, by definition, are always 4 planets, but strings can be more than 4 planets. I'll say that again. A pyramid, by definition, has 4 planets. So when you say pyramid, that's what we're looking at right here on the screen. When you say string, then it could be more than that. Wait a minute. I got mixed up here. That's the string. Sorry about that. That's the string. And there's the pyramid. Okay. So a pyramid, by definition, has 4 planets. There's the string, and could have easily more than 4 planets. Okay. What I'm trying to do here is give you a sense of good terminology to use and terminology you will often hear. To make it simple for yourself, you can just call them all supersymmetry patterns and specify how many planets are in the supersymmetry pattern. You can just call let's go over it again one more time. Using supersymmetry language, that's just a midpoint structure. That is not supersymmetry. That's just Jupiter conjunct Uranus Pluto. This is a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. Happens to be a string, but I can just call it a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. And this in pink is also a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. Happens to be a pyramid, but I can also just call it a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. And here are the 5 planets. And when you get up to 5 planets, typically we almost always call them just supersymmetry patterns. So we would call this a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern. Or to be more specific, 5-planet 3-midpoint supersymmetry pattern. Okay. Okay, now in the past, we introduced a variety of different terms for these planetary configurations. So if you're a student of vibrational astrology, I'm making this video in June 2021. This is our new streamlined terminology as of June 2021. Before now, we've had variations of the terminology. I'm not going to mention what those variations are because let's just focus on what the new terminology is. But if you, have read or studied before June of 2021, might have been explained slightly differently, and other terminologies use lots of other ideas. And as vibrational astrology has advanced, and we're learning about more kinds of planetary configurations, the language got overwhelming with so many terms as we learn about different things. So we've simplified it to this. I'm going to show you a few more terms, but we've simplified it a lot. So here, I've already gone over this, but here's a nice summary. Beautiful little slide here. On the left, a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern, a string. In the middle, also a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern, which is the pyramid that we already studied. And on the right is a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern. So this is just emphasizing the language used, that you can call the one on the left a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern, or you can call it a string. The one in the middle, you can call it a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern, or call it a pyramid. And the one on the right is a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern. And we notice that the 4-planet configurations have 2 midpoint structures. The 5-planet supersymmetry pattern has 3 midpoint structures. that is the typical scenario. When we get up above 5 planets, start getting into 6, 7 planets, the number of midpoint structures can vary. With the smaller ones, like 4 and 5 planets, that's just what we're seeing here is typically the way it is. Okay, so there is one more detail about 4-planet supersymmetry patterns that I have not explained yet. There are actually 4 kinds of supersymmetry patterns. Okay, let me introduce just a little bit more terminology that's needed to describe the different kinds of 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. There are actually 3 variations of pyramids. String, there's no variations. A string is a string is a string. Very simple. But there are actually 3 variations of pyramids. And sometimes we do not distinguish them. So if you don't want to distinguish between them, you just call them pyramids. But there are 3 kinds of 4-planet pyramids. And the one we looked at so far, to be more specific, is a simple pyramid. And here are the 4 variations of 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. Okay, so we're getting a lot of terminology here, so let me say that again. Here are the 4 variations of 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. Okay, the one on the left is the string, right? That's the one we started with. Saturn, Uranus, Jupiter, Pluto equally spread, making the 2 midpoint structures. And number 2 is a simple pyramid. To be more specific, we call this a simple pyramid because it's simple. It's just Uranus is conjunct Jupiter, Saturn midpoint, go halfway between one of these sides and put Venus there, and that Venus is conjunct Saturn, Uranus midpoint. That is a simple pyramid. You can have an opposition pyramid, is one of the other kinds of pyramids. And the opposition pyramid is just the fact that if we go back to configuration number 2 here, Venus could be opposition Saturn, Uranus midpoint. Or Uranus could be opposition the Jupiter, Saturn midpoint. Or Jupiter could be opposition Uranus, Pluto midpoint if we look at all 5 planets. Any of these conjunctions obviously could also be oppositions. So an opposition pyramid is where one of the 4 planets is opposition. So in this case, we have Mercury conjunct the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. This happens to be my 49 vibration chart. If you want to bring up the whole chart, you pull up my chart, and which of course is in the database in the Kepler series software. Pull up 49 vibration chart, and you will see this if you want to bring up the whole thing and you want to look at these midpoint structures. If you bring it up in the software and you look at the midpoint structures, you will see this. So this is another example. And what you'll see in the midpoint structures is that Mercury is conjunct the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. So I put here in purple outline with a slight yellow tint, Mercury, Jupiter, Uranus, with little arrows over here going from Jupiter to Mercury and Uranus to Mercury. So Mercury is at Jupiter, Uranus midpoint. We go halfway between Mercury and Jupiter. But instead of being conjunct, as we saw in configuration number 2, opposition the Mercury-Jupiter midpoint is the Sun. And we see that in the midpoint configuration. Sun is opposition Mercury-Jupiter midpoint, 1 degree 13 minutes. Mercury is conjunct the Jupiter-Uranus midpoint, 33 minutes. That's an opposition pyramid. Opposition pyramid just means that one of the 2 midpoints is an opposition rather than conjunction. So you see the opposition glyph there. Venus is not part of supersymmetry pattern. It's not part of the supersymmetry pattern because Mercury is at Venus-Uranus midpoint, but it's not part of a second midpoint structure. So the rule is, let me say it again, look at a midpoint structure, Sun at Mercury-Uranus. Do you see two of these planets somewhere else? Yes, I see them. I see, let's see, Sun, Mercury, Jupiter. I see Mercury and Jupiter. So Mercury and Jupiter are in the Mercury conjunct Jupiter-Uranus midpoint. Are two of these, Sun, Mercury, and Jupiter, in this midpoint? No, only Mercury is. Sun is not, Jupiter is not. So Venus, which happens to be conjunct Jupiter, Venus is at 15 Aries, Jupiter is 17 Aries, but Venus is not part of the opposition pyramid pattern. And therefore, Venus is not part of an important part of my personality, an important part of my behavior. It's not part of this configuration. It's not participating in it because these configurations are more important than one particular aspect because it's involving a lot of planets. Okay, now the other possibility, of course, is you could have a double opposition pyramid. So there's only three possibilities. Either you have a simple pyramid where both midpoint structures are conjunction, because there's two midpoint structures, or one is opposition, one is conjunct, or they're both opposition, obviously. Either both midpoints are conjunct, both are opposition, or one is conjunct and one is opposition. That's all it is. That's the only distinction. And here's an example of an opposition pyramid, or a lot of times we like to call it double opposition pyramid. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. Let me say it correctly. We have a simple pyramid, an opposition pyramid, and a double opposition pyramid. So this is a double opposition pyramid. That's the name of it, where both midpoint structures are oppositions. And what's happening here, if you're just curious about this is also my 17 vibration chart. So I have a lot of midpoint stuff going on, midpoint stuff. Let me say that in a more formal way. I have a lot of supersymmetry configurations in my 17 vibration chart. And the one that I have here in purple, I show that Neptune is opposition the Mercury-Mars midpoint. So all three of these are in the purple color. Mercury and Mars with the arrows going to Neptune. So Neptune is opposition, the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And then Mercury is opposition, the Venus-Mars midpoint. And you'll notice that both configurations have Mercury and Mars. So Mercury and Mars are both colored in the purple and the orange, because they're in both of them. And then Venus and Neptune, those are the planets that are different. So it's a double opposition pyramid. So if you want to be very specific, you can say I have a simple pyramid in my chart, or I have an opposition pyramid, or you can say I have a double opposition pyramid. You can be more specific if you want to. Or you can be very generic and not be specific at all. And what can you call it? You can just call it a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. So again, to summarize, all 4 of these chart wheels are 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. You do not have to get into the very specific language. You know what some astrologers are doing is they use the simple language to find things, because maybe, especially if you're a beginner in this, you don't want to get overloaded. But if somebody says to you, I have a double opposition pyramid in my 17 vibration chart, you know what they're saying. So you want to develop facility so that you understand these terms as soon as they're said. Someone says let's review. Someone says I have a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern in my 17 vibration chart. What does it mean? It means it's a string or some kind of pyramid. 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. It means those 4 planets are making 2 midpoint structures. That's it. If you want to be more specific about that 4-planet supersymmetry pattern, you could say it's a string or a pyramid. Right? That would be more specific. If you want to be even more specific, and it's a pyramid, there are 3 kinds of pyramids. So you have 3 levels of how specific you want to be. Number 1, just call it a 4-planet supersymmetry pattern. Number 2, call it a string or a pyramid. Or number 3, the most specific, is you can call it a string and which kind of pyramid it is. That's what happens with 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. Once you get to 5 planets, there's typically what we do is we just call it a supersymmetry pattern. The only exception to that is if it happens to be a string, we could call it a 5-planet string, for example. Right? I mean, all of this is really common sense. It's common sense. If you think about it, look at this wheel on the left. 1, 2, 3, 4 planets equally spread. Well, what if I have a 5th one? I have a 5th planet that's 33 degrees from Pluto or 33 degrees from Saturn. Then I have a 5-planet string. This is really not rocket science. If you have a string, you can just call it a string. What if I have a planet 33 degrees before Saturn and another one 33 degrees after Pluto, and I've got 6 planets? Just call it a 6-planet string. But if you're looking at the midpoint structures and you're finding these 2 planets that are in common, you may not notice that it's a string. You may just notice it's a supersymmetry pattern. And that's fine. No problem. You don't have to notice that it's a string. You can just say, I have a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern or a 6-planet supersymmetry pattern. That's fine. If you want to be more specific, you can call it a string. But if it's not a string, such as my 5-planet configuration, you can just call it, typically we just call it a 5-planet supersymmetry, a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern. Okay. All right, so this just summarizes what I said. I'm at 42 minutes. This is a long video, and I will, well, let me just review this because I've already said this. The images of planetary configurations on the previous slide show 4-planet supersymmetry patterns, and we identified specifically what kind of supersymmetry pattern they are. When 5 or more planets are involved, it is most common to just refer to them as supersymmetry patterns. That's what we do. We just call them supersymmetry patterns. So we have, and the way you do that is you say, I have a 5-planet supersymmetry pattern, or a 6-planet supersymmetry pattern, or whatever it is. You can also refer to all 4 planetary configurations shown on the previous slide simply as 4-planet supersymmetry patterns. This is just to have it in writing what I've already said. And here's the summary. I think this is my last slide. No. I've got a few more. Okay. You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up with this slide and review this as we head into the next video in this series, because I'm already at almost 44 minutes. Let's stop here. We'll have another quick review of this at the beginning of the next one, and then we'll move on to our next topic. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.